Good afternoon, everyone, and my name is John Corstein. I'm Director Emeritus of the USS Monitor Center at the Mariners Museum and Park. And today, I'm going to talk about one of my favorite topics. That happens to be the guns of the CSS Virginia. Now, the CSS Virginia, is going to be created as a result, well, let me come back to that. As a result of the mind of Stephen Russell Mallory. Mallory had been chairman of the Senate's Committee on the Conduct of Naval Warfare. So he's seen all these changes that have been happening in Europe. And so he wants, because he's given the job of creating the Confederate Navy, he wants to make sure that he creates a ship that heretofore has never been seen in naval service. Steam-powered, rifled guns, armor plating, and a ram. And so he wanted these ships that the Confederacy was going to create to be the death knell for wooden warships. And as a result of that, Mallory thought, oh, I'll just buy some from England, but that's kind of impossible. So you had to have homegrown ironclads. In other words, those built in a cornfield like the Albemarle, those that are built so far upriver they can't come down, because of the draft. That's the CSS news. So you have all these problems, but somehow the Confederacy, number one, is able to develop a fairly effective design. Number two, they arm these ships with probably the most advanced rifled gun in the 1860s. And that is what this gun is right here. This is a Brooke gun. You can see the banding at the breech area, and so we'll get to the technology involved with that. Having an armor-plated ship is a necessity because of this man, and this man is Henry Paixhans, and he is a French army officer. And just remember, during the Napoleonic Wars in which he fought, they're using explosive shells, but they're using them not as much as solid shot, but they recognize the burst is very anti-personnel. And so Paixhans, ponders this topic, and so he'll write two books in the 1820s where he says, look, if we want to end war forever, we want to put shell guns on ships because they will destroy the ships. So they will be that do-it-all weapon, like a nuclear warhead today, However, the big problem is that, shell guns require certain modifications to a barrel. Why? Because it takes more powder to send out that shell than would a solid shot. So that's going to be a problem that Paixhans actually deals with himself, and which he develops what is known as a 32-pounder shell gun, and which actually the U.S. Navy uses in the 1840s. Now, he also said, I want an integrated battery. So by integrated battery, I have, let's just say I got a ship of the line, my lower deck, gun deck, I'm going to have 42-pounder carronades everywhere. So I can manage the ammunition, the powder, and everything in a pretty simple fashion. Then, as you go up the ship, you have different types of guns so that you're able to fire different guns and different shells or shot at another ship at the same time. So in other words, it's kind of like, remember those pens that used to change color by a little flipping them at the top? Maybe I'm dating myself, but I thought they were cool. But it's kind of like that, you know. I have to conform my shot for what the enemy is. So Paixhans is really brilliant with that. His shell gun is somewhat prone to burst. And so this man came along, and his name, of course, is Thomas Rodman. And Rodman is, of course, a West Point graduate. He's not named for Thomas Jackson, by the way, just to let you all know. He's before Jackson became famous. But he actually will develop a gun very similar to the Dahlgren, but it's for land use. Because as they're building all these major forts, like Fort Monroe, like Fort Pulaski, on down the line, they have to have the proper armament to go in those casemates. And so he's going to develop a shell gun that actually is going to prove reasonably effective, but it's for land use only. So here we come, the guy that really is going to revolutionize naval warfare. And this is my hero, John Adolphus Dahlgren. And so he is going to invent you see the gun behind him is actually a Dahlgren rifled gun. That does not prove with great success, but he does solve the bursting of the gun. In other words, you know, I got to have a larger breach area to support the larger explosion and that expansion of all the gases that happen within a gun when it's sending out a shot or a shell. So the first gun he invents is, of course, the boat howitzer. Believe it or not, the Virginia has two of these on its hurricane deck. One bow, one stern. And Buchanan insisted on it because he thought everyone was going to try and board the ship. And so he wanted to have a boat howitzer to say, you can't do that. So here is the real gun that is part of the CSS Virginia's armament. This is of course, 9-inch shell gun. And we have one in the museum on display, and we have another one from the Virginia also on display. Now, actually, this gun is very brilliant because, number one, it can fire explosive shell, but it also can fire solid shot. It's kind of like a shotgun, you know. I can send a deer slug, I can send a, dove shot, and so forth out of my gun. So that means it's multi-purposed, and the soda pop bottle look, is all because of containing those gases. So the Confederates, when they capture Gosport Navy Yard, they find, the numbers kind of vary, but it's like 299-inch Dahlgrens laying there on the quay. In fact, some of them you can see have been hammered by sledgehammers to try and ruin them from Confederate use. So the Virginia is going to have 6 of these on board. And so we'll show the gun deck in just a little bit, but these are towards after the smokestack and the engine. That's when these Dahlgrens are going to appear, 9-inch Dahlgrens. They're staggered because there's only so much room on the gun deck because you got to have recoil, right? So that's going to be a big issue. So they're staggered as they go down towards the stern. And gun number 4 and number 5 during the battle are going to be used as hot shot guns. Now, this is a hot shot furnace. Notice it's on a fort. which is a safe place to have a furnace burning hot shot. However, some ships will have these hot shot furnaces, which causes a great deal of difficulty in firing your weapon. Now, basically, the Constitution, excuse me, had one on it. So that gives you an advantage. If you don't have explosive shells, what's the next best thing? Well, I want to send a round ball into your side that will catch everything on fire. So you can see there are racks that, balls drop down as they become cherry red. Very particular about how the color had to be, because if you got it any hotter, it would start to elongate the shot. And that meant you wouldn't have the same effect. In fact, it might cause too much damage to you. So basically, there's a hot shot furnace right below the hatchway, right next to these two 9-inch Dahlgrens. These Dahlgrens, during the battle with the USS Congress, USS Cumberland, are going to be, very effective. Of course, they're commanded by a man known as Lieutenant John Randolph Eggleston. And as a result of that, he has been a gunnery officer. He's a Naval Academy graduate. He was a professor at the Naval Academy. So they put him in charge of this type of gun is because he is able to really understand their use. So how you use this gun is you got the furnace down below. The steam is going to fire the fires. The fires are independent of the engine fires. So you got to stoke it. There's going to be a fireman. There's going to be a coal heaver there. And so they're building up all this heat in an enclosed furnace. And they actually have to be very safe with this, because the problem is if you drop one of those red hot cannonball, hot shot, what's going to happen? Your ship is going to burn. So that's definitely what you don't want to have happen. So Eggleston writes about the battle, and of course he talks about firing against the USS Congress. And he says it was odd to fire against his home of 2 years. Yeah, he served on the Congress before the war. However, he said the best way to fire these guns are to actually skip them. Okay, so just imagine in your mind, here comes a hot shot out of the Virginia, and it's about 100 yards off of, or maybe less than that, 100 feet off of the Cumberland. It hits the water like a rock. It skips upward. Okay? Now, you can imagine the practice that takes to do. But, so the reasoning behind that is so that as the shot comes up into the ship, it will hit the ship farther up its side, causing more damage, and increases its speed with the skip. And so actually he is able to fire one hot shot against the Congress. And that hot shot supposedly rumbled through the Congress, lodging next to the magazine, creating a fire. So we know with that one shot, the Congress is doomed. However, because of the dangers of hot shot, this is really a land purpose weapon. But remember, John Mercer Brooke is told by Stephen Russell Mallory, this must be the death knell for wooden ships. So make sure it is. The hot shot is one way we can make sure that it is. Now, prior to the Civil War, there had been a lot of discussion about how can we make our guns more accurate? How can we fire them farther? And so this man, who's head of the West Point Foundry, Robert Parrott, is going to develop not the first rifled gun, but the first effective rifled gun right before the war. In fact, he comes out with 10-pounders, which you can see the band. Now, Parrott rifles his gun differently than most other people. And so what he does is he casts a barrel, and depending on the size, he might have to put a tube down it, so when he's casting it, that it maintains the barrel innards. In other words, I got the solid place. Because once you get to larger calibers, you would have to drill out the cast iron. And that takes a great deal of time, and also is not effective when you have these larger caliber guns. Parrott is going to have 150. He makes a 200-pounder Parrott gun. Now, what he did is once he cast the weapon, he then would heat a wrought iron band. So we have the cast iron cooling, and then we wrap this band around it. And to make it all adhere properly, he decided to send cold jets of water down the barrel so that band would adhere. Now, you probably heard stories on board ships during the Civil War where their Parrott gun burst. And that's because of that tremendous pressure, especially 100-pounder Parrotts, 150-pounder Parrotts were the most popular guns during the war. So this man has developed the rifled gun that is going to be most popular with the U.S. Navy. And you can see one right here. This is Fort Brady on the James River. And you can see the single band. And as we look down, there are different types of guns. You can even see a Dahlgren. But that's guarding a place called Trench's Reach near Chaffin's Bluff on the James River. This man is the man that's going to really make a difference, and this man happens to be John Mercer Brooke. Now, Brooke is a brilliant scientist. He invents, he works under Matthew Fontaine Maury. He invents the bathymeter, which tests the depth of the water. It has a system where it can bring up earth, so you start to learn about the canyons and everything. That's all thanks to John Mercer Brooke. Actually, he got a $5,000 bonus from U.S. Congress, which he picked up in February of 1861. And so what did he do with that money? He invested it in Confederate bonds. So, some people are smart, some people aren't. So he ponders the problem of having rifled guns, because the Confederacy has to have a more effective type of onboard weapon and coastal defense weapon, because these Parrotts have not made it down to southern fortifications. So the Confederacy is either going to have to import rifles like the Blakely rifle, like the Armstrong rifle. And when you look at an Armstrong rifle, you realize it's a series of bands around it to make sure it doesn't burst. Brooke says you ought to double band every ship gun you can. When he casts it using the Parrott method, or Rodman method actually, he will then band it twice at the same time. So he put this huge band on it, then another band on it, and then he sends lukewarm jets down the barrel, so that the cooling process is more consistent and adheres in a stronger way. Plus, he's got two bands. So that means that the Brooke gun, and here is a double-banded Brooke gun. This is a reproduction down in Plymouth, North Carolina, but this is the type of gun that would have been on the CSS Albemarle. It's a 6.4-inch Brooke gun. 6.4-inch Brooke guns are equal to a 100-pounder Parrott. Why they like to call it different things, North and South? It's because they had a civil war, I guess. So anyway, they will be 2 of these on the Virginia. They will be on Marcelli mounts, as you see right here. The 7-inch Brooke guns are going to be located at the bow and the stern. These are pivot mount, right, weapons. Now, and if you notice, the stern and the bow have what? 3 gun ports. So because my gun is on a pivot mount, I can fire that way, and that way. That gives me a better field of fire when I'm moving against an enemy ship. So Brooke ponders the Brooke gun, and how can he make it better? But he also reads about what is building in the north, and that happens to be several ironclads. So he says, how am I going to sink an ironclad with another ironclad using my ordnance? And as a result of that, he will develop what is called the Brooke bolt. And here you go, right in there. And it's got a core. So what the Brooke bolt does, it's an armor-piercing shot. So break through the, let's say, I've seen it break through up to 6 inches of armor. So it breaks through that, and then the lower part of the bolt will carry through behind it, doing what? Well, it bounces around inside your boat, which is not a good thing to do. Plus, you got a hole in it. Actually, Brooke guns, probably 7-inch, because we know they had them. 7-inch Brooke guns, actually, during the Battle of Charleston, April 7th, 1863, they're using and parapet Brooke guns. They're firing down on the monitors as they're attacking. And actually, 2 monitors get holes in their decks from Brooke guns. Now, their deck armor is only 3 inches, but those holes, had it been rough seas, the Weehawken would have sunk, right? The Catskill would have sunk, because if you got a hole on your deck and you're in heavy seas and monitors are great for sinking, what's going to happen? The Confederates. So this is a brilliant thing. One of the big problems for the Virginia is these are difficult to make. And so actually all ordnance is difficult for the Confederates to make. So as a result of that, they are, when they get ready to send the Virginia out into Hampton Roads in early March, they decide not to make Brooke bolts. Instead, they want to make more explosive shells, because the thought is, well, those Union vessels haven't been finished yet, although soon be, but we have to have shells to sink all those wooden ships, and we'll make those bolts later. Well, that becomes a major problem during the battle with the Monitor. They actually fire hot shot at the Monitor, believe it or not, because it's solid shot. And they don't have enough solid shot to really effectively use against the Monitor. The Brooke guns only have shells. Now, just remember, this is going to be the executive officer of the CSS Virginia. He works with Brooke about how we're going to best arm this ship. So they ascertain that the forward gun has to be a 7-inch Brooke gun because of its range, because also, I'm pointing my ship at my target, I have to be able to destroy it. And during the battle with the USS Cumberland, the forward Brooke gun will actually, I think its first shot against the Cumberland will wreck the Cumberland's pivot rifle and, just destroys it. So, basically this Brooke gun gives you a tremendous advantage. The Federals probably had on the Cumberland a 60-pounder Parrott gun. There's no 70-pounder, and that's what everyone writes about, but I pretty well know nobody made a so here we go. Let's start at the very beginning. You can see there is the 7-inch rifled Brooke gun, 7-inch. And so it has 3 gun ports to fire out of, and it's on a pivot mount. Then you come back, and remember these guns have to be staggered. So these have to be right here. They are 6.4-inch Brooke guns. So in the forward of my ship, I have most of my power, most of my ordnance that can damage other vessels. And added to this, the Confederates will, I know these aren't the guns of the Virginia, but just check that beak out. They call it beak, they call it prow, they call it ram, they call it a lot of things. But this gives the ironclad tremendous advantage because, we had been ramming ships for several centuries. It really went out of favor during the Roman Empire era. They were still using some at the Battle of Lepanto, but rams, you couldn't get close enough because of cannon. Now I've got an armored ship, so the shot from the enemy is going to bounce off my armored sides, so I can really get up and ram the enemy ship. Now, this sounds like a great idea, and in essence, it worked very well. But every time the Confederates ram and sink a Union ship, and I think I'll use the Cumberland as an example. Basically, we ram the ship, and they've already put the ship in reverse, right? But it's so difficult to put the ship in reverse. You can go into the Monitor Center and see a model of the ship. You have to actually use a crowbar to change the gears. So basically, when the ram hits in this case, it's not extending very far from the bow of the ship. As a result of that, sticks in the side of the Cumberland, and the Cumberland starts to go down, and the weight of the Cumberland resting on the bow and ram is going to do what? Take the Confederate ironclad down with it. As one person, E.A. Jack, said he was in the engine room, third assistant engineer, said, I felt our ship take a tremendous shudder. That's when they rammed it. But then I felt our ship take a dangerous tilt. That's quite correct. It starts to go down. However, the Cumberland slips off of it. A case in point is the CSS Albemarle. When it comes down the Roanoke River, it rams the USS Southfield, and it has a longer ram. One of the problems with the Virginia ram is it not long enough. Okay, so when they lose this ram during the March 8th battle somewhere, we don't know exactly where it dropped off. It's not in the Cumberland, so that's a mystery. I hope someone finds it, their holy relic. The big thing is the Albemarle has a ram built into the ship's keel, right? And so that gives it greater strength. It's longer. It's 6 feet long. And so when it rams the south field starts to sink immediately, right? Because it goes beneath the deck into the undefended hull. Now, this is what they wanted to do to the Monitor when they built the second ram onto the Virginia. Basically, they make it 12 feet long with a squared steel tip. You ask why? Well, if you look at the Monitor, remember the armored deck goes over like this over the hull, and so what they wanted to do is ram the Monitor so that that ram came under the deck and punched hole through the 1-inch boiler plate of the Monitor's hull. Had that happen, guess what? Sayonara to the Monitor. But of course, that did not happen. And so the beak is a very effective thing. On the Albemarle, actually, as the south field is sinking like this, here's the Albemarle. Albemarle starts to go down like this. Actually, water comes in its gun deck, right? And that's kind of scary. But then the south field slips off, it bounces up, and it goes on with the battle. So as we're looking at the Virginia here, we can actually see the rifle guns there. Okay, so here, of course, is where the 9-inch Dahlgren hot shot guns exist, because if I get this steady, right there is a hatch. So you can imagine making these cannonballs cherry red, and I have the manual where it says make it this color. You got to put it in a trundle, and then you got to take it up to the gun deck. Now remember, when you have a cherry red hot shot going up onto the gun deck, what are your problems? You got gunpowder on the gun deck, you've got explosive shells, and you got this burning thing. And so you have to be extremely careful with it. The trundle then is taken to the muzzle of the gun, and the 4-man trundle, believe it or not. So, and here's this hot thing, and their trundles are going to be back like this. So you could see it's not a good job. And so basically they prepare the tube. First they put in the gunpowder. Then they put in a dry sabot. Then they put in a wet sabot. Then they put in the hot shot. Then they put in a dry sabot so the ball doesn't roll out, for some reason. And so you're now ready to fire. And the big thing is, you have to, when you're on a hot shotgun, you then, once it's loaded, you have to, remember, it's loaded away from the gun port. So now you got to bring it back into action using ropes. And you got to do this quickly, because you got to fire that gun very quickly. So the gun officer needs to have already picked out his target, aimed his gun appropriately, and then that's when the shot goes in. And then as soon as that dry sabot is put in, the gun's brought into action, and then it is fired. So this is a 7-minute process. And if you think of the men, there are 10 men at least that have to handle a hot shotgun. Okay, and the pivot guns take 16, because you have to have the men there also to move the pivots. Now I'll tell you, the Virginia, to my knowledge, never moved its pivot guns. So those extra gun ports were unnecessary. The concept, however, of having a pivot gun on a casemated ironclad is not lost on the designers after they create the Virginia. So when you look at the CSS Albemarle, it only has 2 guns. It only has 6 gun ports. So you got a forward and a stern pivot gun that can fire out side ports and out the stern, likewise to the port. So that is because you have this problem with weight. See, the Virginia already was overweighted. It actually had a 22-foot draft. So the amount of poundage you put on is going to affect its operation. Now, the big thing is that these hotshot guns, one of them gets its muzzle blown off. And that's the one here in the Mariners Museum. So as we go down the gun deck, yay, we are right here. So this gun and the gun across from it, right, which would be here, are going to be commanded by Reuben Tom. They're 9-inch Dahlgrens. Right here, wait a second. You know, this thing doesn't always want to. There you go. That's a 9-inch Dahlgren commanded by Thomas Kevel of the United Artillery. His men are manning those guns. Marines are manning those other guns. And then you get to the bow gun. And so that is the example of the gun deck for the CSS Virginia. You can see that they are expecting to put a lot of weight on this vessel. And so they use, notice, live oak. Live oak, there are tons of knees that support decks at Gosport Navy Yard. So it's easy to, use them. However, recognizing the tremendous weight 10 guns have on a gun deck, right? Just think 6.4-inch Brooke gun, right, is going to weigh 9,000 pounds, okay? So, and you got 2 of them, and so you just expand all that weight. And so you realize that's why we have iron beams or iron knees to support the deck. This, you can see a picture. This is, there are actually 2 versions of this very same picture. This one has to date from before March 1862, because that is the ram that was originally put on the Virginia. Now, remember when they're mounting it, the flange, oh my gosh, I'm getting good with this. The flange right there, one of them cracks as they're mounting the ram. And they don't fix it or anything because the actually ship constructor, John Luke Porter, doesn't want to have the ram on it, so he doesn't care. So that's a problem. So you'll also see a colorized version of the same view with the longer ram on it. And that was done for the 1907 Jamestown Centennial in Norfolk. So here is the hotshot gun that is damaged. You can see what makes this gun great is that, whoops, I'm not supposed to do that. Is that, you all probably seen this before because one of my favorite slides. You can see the damage on the castable, on the trunnions, and you can see where a shot, now the gunners of the Cumberland are aiming straight at the gun ports, right? And so this gun is getting ready to go back into action when a shot breaks off its chase. Midshipman Marmaduke is going to be wounded. The gun fires, but they can't use it anymore as a hotshot gun. And so the Federals blow off the tip of one other Dahlgren, but they continue to fire it. And what's great is, those guns don't come out very far from the gun port. And so you have flames coming back into the casemate, right, from that damaged 9-inch Dahlgren. Nevertheless, they keep firing it. They don't care because, they've got targets they need to reach. The Minnesota and St. Lawrence probably survive March 8th because the hot shot gun on that side of the Virginia is this one. And so they can't send hot shot into the Minnesota. They can send shells, and that does damage both the St. Lawrence and the Minnesota. But in essence, this gun is virtually worthless for the Confederates after this. And that's why it still remains today. So, in conclusion, the Virginia has so many different tools to use to damage wooden warships. Everything about this ship, just think about it, is determined to sink a wooden ship. It's got protection, it's got speed, although 5 knots is not great speed. It's kind of like going around in my duck boat, but it still is faster than a sailing ship without any wind. So that gave this vessel this tremendous advantage. The range of its Brooke guns, the danger of its hot shot, the explosive shells that are mounted within this vessel are designed to destroy wooden warships, which the Virginia proves it can and does during March 8th, 1862. So, in essence, the Virginia was ready actually to also fight against an ironclad. The trouble is they did not have the right ammunition. Notice during the battle with the Monitor, Jones actually tries to ram the Monitor. However, he doesn't know that the ram's missing. And he puts it in reverse too quickly, and so it doesn't do any damage to the Monitor. Had they been going full speed, the Monitor would have gone up like this, right? And causing water to go in to the turret probably, and causing the Monitor to go down. So that's the power of rams during the Civil War. If you look at the Western theater of naval operations, you're going to see all sorts of rams being used because they've got a narrow width, well, not that narrow, but they got a narrow width, defined battlefield. So you actually can use your rams as an offensive weapon more effectively than you can if you are fighting in a harbor like Hampton Roads. So I thank you all for being here today, and all I can say is always sink before surrender. Thank you.